Welcome everyone to our webinar this morning. We are still waiting for a few attendees to join, so let's just give them a minute or two to log in. We don't want to start and lose some of our audience, so please just be patient with us for 2 minutes. Maybe if you want, go grab a coffee or water, but we know it's probably going to be coffee, and we're going to enjoy a very insightful presentation in a minute or two. Well, I think, ladies and gents, I think this morning we can kickstart with introducing our esteemed panelists. And I'm very excited to introduce those joining the presentation, but also discussion, which I think is going to be quite a unique way of looking at the survey results. And with that in mind, as you can see in front of us in live, but also on the presentation, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Debbie Tagg. I'm CEO with Smart Procurement, and very privileged to be invited here and to launch the survey in partnership with Oxalys and CIPS Africa. So first of all, our guest speaker from Oxalys is Anne Emmanuel Green, and she has the beautiful French accent that she'll be sharing with us this morning. As we were saying earlier, she could have been talking about doing dishes, and it still sounds so beautiful. So Anne, welcome. And she is head of Oxalys South Africa. And then a person that a lot of you might know already and seen also on the Smart Procurement platform, sharing so many insights, and just really someone that understands the more technological side of procurement, and that is the head of procurement from Data, Stacey McTavish. So welcome, Stacey. You're on mute, but I think she said she's happy to be here.
I am. Thank you, Debbie.
Welcome, welcome. And then, of course, also no stranger to the procurement fraternity in Africa, and that is Hemant Harilal. So Hemant, welcome. Hemant is Managing Director of CIPS Africa, or CIPS. So welcome, Hemant.
Thanks, Debbie. Good morning, all.
Fantastic. So without further ado, welcome also to our audience that has joined us. And as we go through, I would tell you to keep your cell phones on silent, but we don't have to do that anymore. So all I do urge you to do is try and join us and enjoy the conversation. And hopefully you don't get distracted too much by calls and messages, because these days it seems like we get bombarded even when we're trying to be in a meeting. And without further ado, we'll just show the agenda for this morning. So first of all, we will look at the context of the survey, an overview and key perspectives of procurement in 2021, which I think is a very meaningful insight given the situations we find ourselves in currently. And then the third is digital procurement, and fourth is Q&A. So that's where we ask you, the audience, to please, as you're going through, type your questions in the chat. So you know where to find that. It's pretty similar to most other webinar platforms. Please give us your questions. If we can, then we will have some time at the end and enjoy discussing them with our esteemed panelists. So to kick off the survey context, so Oxalys has launched their first ever annual procurement survey in South Africa. And as our guest here, please, if you can remind us and share with us the context of the survey.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Debbie. So basically, we realized that there was no similar survey that has been conducted before. Of course, there has been some global procurement studies, and some of them have included South Africa in their findings, but there was really nothing locally conducted in South Africa and focusing on its specificities. So we said, okay, there is an opportunity here, and there is something to be done here, and that's why we decided to launch the first edition of this Oxalys South Africa Procurement Survey, with the objective to understand and shed some light on procurement key practices and pain points today in South Africa. We wanted to really start the discussion around it, to really start a dynamic on it, especially now at a time when procurement is more strategic than ever to all organizations. So we are very happy. I must say that we are happy with the results. We have received more than 222 responses, all from South African procurement professionals, And Debbie, if we can look, if we can go back to the previous slides, I will try to give you some insights about the survey respondent profile. Yeah, here we go. Perfect. So, so basically, when we look at the profile of our respondents, we can see that most of them are quite senior, with 70% having more than 10 years experience. When we look at also as the position of the respondents, we can see that we have a lot of procurement people, whether they are a procurement manager or buyers and other procurement team member. So it's really focused on procurement people, even if we really wanted to open the survey to all positions to make sure that we can add perspective to the result and that we are able to compare different points of view. Then on the next slide, if we look at the organization size, we can see that almost half of the respondents come from pretty large organizations with more than 1,000 employees. But when we look at the company,
I think we've just lost Anne there for a second.
oh, sorry, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, Anne, you're back.
Sorry, so I was saying that 31% of our respondents came from organizations with less than 1 billion rand in terms of turnover and revenue, and 31% came from organizations with more than 10 billion rands in revenue, so pretty large organization. And when we look at the industry distribution on the next slides.
Apologies. There we go.
It's coming. Here we go. Perfect. So we can see that manufacturing is making 19% of our responses. So this is a huge representation as well. But as you can see, we also have a strong representation from the public sector and non-profit organization, making 22% of our responses. So this is quite of our profile of our respondents, and I trust that this will help you to understand our findings in this survey.
Thank you very much, Anne. And while we're at this section within the presentation, I'd like to pose a question to Stacey. Why have you, as a procurement head, responded to this survey, and why have you found this interesting?
So Debbie, yeah, good question. You know, for me as a procurement professional, I think it's really important to sort of stay abreast of the mood of the market, what's happening. There have been a couple of times over the last year where I've asked myself, is this me, you know? And so I guess it's a curiosity to see where my fellow practitioners are and how they've experienced the last year since COVID hit us. You know, and I'm glad I participated because I found huge insights in the results, as we're going to see a little bit later as we move through the you know, through the presentation. You know, but for me really was understanding where, you know, where is the rest of the country in terms of COVID, and where's the rest of the country from a procurement point of view in terms of digitalisation. You know, sometimes I feel like we're far behind. You know, other times I think we're okay. And so it was really insightful to see, you know, that my fellow practitioners are really struggling with some of the same issues and struggling with the same barriers to digitalisation.
Fantastic, thank you, Stacey. And then again, it shows that collaboratively, perhaps innovative solutions can be found. So thank you for taking the time and supporting the survey. Hemant, at CIPS Africa, why have you partnered with Oxalys on this initiative?
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. So I think first and foremost, it was to build on our current knowledge. And it was really a good opportunity to gain, you know, richer insights into procurement digitization. And so to inform approaches. I think we struggle with that. You know, it seems to be the buzzword in the last 2 years, but the adoption of such technologies is something that we struggle as an industry. And just given the time that the survey was set in, you know, we set in the context of a global pandemic, I thought it was quite interesting, you know, to measure the engagement of the procurement community, something that Stacey alluded to, and specifically our members as well. So that's it, simply put.
Fantastic, and I don't want to let the cat out the bag, but definitely we will talk very much to CIPS's role on capacity, and we'll see how that comes through on the survey results. So if we have a look at the overview and key perspectives for procurement in 2021, the first area we looked at is measuring the COVID-19 impact on South African procurement departments. And if you have a look here at this slide, the first sort of obvious one is, where are your main suppliers located? So interestingly enough, I was surprised by this, that 86% was South African based, 24% European. You know, obviously, sadly, with the personal interest that I have, is rest of Africa is only 8%, but we can imagine then how supply and local supply of that 24% was impacted. Stacey, if we also have a look at, I'm going to call on you to comment, but if we look at the next section, it also said, well, what was these supply chain disruptions and what was the consequence? And a majority was, as we said, 82% supply chain disruption and 72% delayed projects. Stacey, how did you experience this dimension data, the COVID-19 crisis? And if you look at the figures that we've just shared here, did these reflect in your own organization?
Yeah, Debbie, it was actually very interesting to see, you know, the previous slide results, because for us, it's probably the other way around. You know, as an IT company, it's probably more like 80% imports. And so we were quite severely impacted from a supply chain point of view. You know, with no passenger flights, you know, all of those being cancelled, with our borders being shut, except for cargo. You know, it's really become a bit of a bum fight trying to get space on your cargo flight to get our goods here. So, you know, a lot of client expectation management was involved, a lot of trauma, a lot of emotion with some of them, but, you know, trying to get them to understand we are in the midst of a pandemic, and just trying to get stuff in country proved quite difficult for us. I think the other way we were sort of impacted is you know, seeing the sort of the knock-on effects. You know, we're in a value chain here. We're in an ecosystem, you know, in supply and procurement. And, you know, we were under a cash crunch. Our clients forcing us to go for longer payment terms. You know, and I had finance the same thing down in, you know, through the chain, you know, through to our suppliers. And, you know, we've got this really strong ethos around supply development at Dimension Data, and yet you know, we're sort of torn between the cash flow issues and trying to be kind to our smaller vendors and help them as much as we could. So it's been a tough year. I'm glad to say we haven't seen too many instances of bankruptcy, which I see was one of the features there with, you know, within our supply base. But really just getting stuff in country and making sure we all stay afloat in this ecosystem.
Thank you very much, Stacey. I think also what we saw in a lot of the departments, or from a procurement perspective, is that what was sourced internationally and was disrupted seems to be quite strategic to production. It might not be the biggest spend. In your case, it obviously is a big spend. But for instance, in the health sector, there is a particular organization that won't even get in the technical, but they have to have something flown in from Germany, and from production to landing here within hospitals is 24 hours. So you could imagine that delay. And again, it's not their biggest spend area, but if they cannot get, let's call it that widget, they can't produce on the other aspects. So it would be interesting to know whether it was spend versus a number of suppliers as well that was impacted. Looking along as well in assessing procurement's performance and maturity. So this was a very insightful area of the survey. And again, Stacey, if I can call on you, just having a look at some of these results. According to you, what or should be performance in procurement? How is that measured?
Unfortunately, Debbie, it's a reality. I'm glad to see those numbers closer to each other than they used to be. Unfortunate reality is for the most part procurement reports into finance, and so, you know, if the CFO's answering that question, he's probably going to say price and cost reduction. If I'm answering it, and the ethos that my team, you know, work with is, it's really about everything we do has to be enabling the company's overall strategy. If it's not, we're doing the wrong things. So really, if we are, I guess, bottom line, enabling sales, the money. So first align what we're doing to company strategy, putting the client first in all the decisions we make, and the money first as a result. So very much understanding and articulating for our teams. And then there's a slide just now coming up that was an eye-opener for me, and I'll probably talk to it then. But aligning with company strategy, making sure everybody in the team understands their role in getting there.
Absolutely. And there's the reverse side of it, but again, I'm not going to let the cat out the bag, so let's get to that slide. This is also very insightful on, if we look at the kind of difference on your more junior buyers, that's in 4B, and then 4C, your CPOs and heads of procurement. And it was interesting to assess procurement maturity. It's really important to identify the roles and objectives beforehand. So if we look at these figures, the procurement's role in the organization does seem to be more tactical than one would have expected, and negotiating the best price still ranks second. There's a question around the impact of COVID on those pressures on price, and I think, Stacey, you alluded to that earlier on, where you're having to cut costs and cash flow within the business, but still look after the suppliers. If we look at 4B and C, there's still a substantial 10% difference between your CPO and your buyer, and perhaps our procurement decision makers still have a way to go to empower their more junior teams on that supporting the organization's overall strategy. If we swing to slide 13 here, it's interesting to see now, again, the survey was done end of 2020, what will be procurement's top priorities in 2021? Look at the top there, cost reduction. Second is managing risk, and then innovation. And obviously COVID-19 really has still highlighted, look at 81% then managing risk. And going back to what you also said, Stacey, that there's that kind of crunch between reducing costs but still delivering on the overall strategy. If we look here at our next slide, again, 54% of respondents strongly believe that procurement departments are effective as a strategic business partner. So they perceived that that procurement is important to the business, but at the end, look at this. Many of them are divided to where the procurement strategy is known and followed within their organization. When we're sitting with 36% don't really know, neither agree nor disagree. So it'd be quite interesting that would then lead to poor performance. So before I actually jump onto that slide, I'd like to call on Hemant, from CIPS's vision and seeing this kind of result, what kind of benchmark and on these findings, how does South Africa, would you say, compares to the rest of the world?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing to mention, Debbie, is we do see the context of COVID play a part in these outcomes, and I think procurement was forced with the challenge to actually navigate through working from home, the demands of business, managing the supplier risk, and obviously cost. Now, globally, if CIPS were to look at procurement, it's about delivering value, not just cost savings. It's about procurement function, building resilience and robust supply chains, and that's improving the transparency, simplifying and reducing the risks. A huge agenda on ethics and integrity, where it's ingrained into that function. And this is not just fraud and corruption, but it also speaks to modern slavery and eradicating modern slavery. There's a huge commitment on sustainability and getting the organization to taking the higher ground. There's a big agenda on innovation, and this is from the supplier base to solutions, and where the procurement function is focused on outputs rather than just inputs. And what's close to most of us is SME development, local sourcing, and diversity. So that's globally what we've seen, and most leading procurement organizations are tending towards. Now, this would tell us that South Africa is behind the curve, and we are, however, I do believe we're in a state of flux. I think some organizations increasingly this becomes the purview of the procurement and supply chain professionals, while others are still operating in a tactical realm and probably as a matter of survival. But I also think we do need to raise the gaze and start to talk more about this. We seem to be stuck in a bit of an ethics space and in a bit of a tactical level. And in order to forge ahead into a more global competitiveness, I think we need to start looking at the rest of it.
Thank you very much. I think you covered some very key areas that were very relevant and have raised the focus from last year in procurement. Interesting, one of our clients, actually many of the CPOs we chatted to last year, everyone that I spoke to, we said, how ready was your demand, sorry, not your demand, your disaster plan within the organization, and where did procurement fit within that? And 100% of them, and that's quite a lot, said it wasn't sufficient, it didn't cover all eventualities, and it didn't include procurement. I also, one of the very, very large banks, as we know, and they're one of the more technologically advanced banks, found themselves having to equip thousands of people to work from home overnight. And we all know that you don't have thousands and thousands of laptops just sitting in warehouses, and then you've got your cost issues. So we can imagine that the opportunity really is for procurement to be positioned for the next Black Swan event, and even what we imagine might be coming through in the various phases. So, and we look to those benchmarks and organizations through CIPS's benchmarking that we can learn from and be better prepared. So thank you for sharing that, Hemant.
Sure. So
what is the way forward to improve procurement performance? So we can see here that we are looking at 70% of supply management, very interesting. Cost optimization, still a very big theme at 59%, but at 53% is skills and capabilities. And Hemant, you're in the hot seat at the moment, but really we need to look at CIPS's response on that. So, you've spoken about these different areas, but where do you see the capacity building and skills growing in order to support this improvement in procurement performance?
Well, personally, I think it's a means to the end, and capability development and skills development leads to our heartland as CIPS. At CIPS, we believe we're the professional development partner for life. And ultimately, our aim and ethos is to improve the capability and profile of the profession and those that serve in it. Currently, there's a focus on procurement and supply like never before. And procurement and supply is intrinsically placed to be a real change agent for greater good. I think coming out of COVID, CEOs and business leaders are seeing procurement and supply teams at the heart of solutions. And I think procurement and supply professionals need to ride this wave. We must position ourselves as strategic partners to aid recovery of businesses, supply chains, and the wider economy. And this places an impressed need for skills. And at CIPS, we tend to keep abreast in terms of developments in the market and capability development on a global scale. And also we have the competency framework that we can boast. But more importantly for organizations and businesses and functions, we have diagnostic tools that can really assess where they are and almost have a roadmap approach in terms of fulfilling their aspirations.
There's a particular saying we used a lot last year, and I really felt that, thank you, Hemant, exactly you said that if we remember the Y2K, maybe we'll give away some age here, ones around the table, but what did Y2K do for the IT role? If you were an IT manager in a company, you became the most important person. Never mind, it didn't all crash in 2000, but the reality is, as you said, COVID and disrupted supply chain really has put procurement and supply chain at the coalface. So what are the skills and the innovation and the strategic viewpoint is procurement bringing now to the table? Because this is our gap. We finally have the spotlight very much on us, the discussion of being at the boardroom tables and the discussion, but what are we bringing to the boardroom table? And where are we leaning heavily on organizations like CIPS to make sure that we're fully equipped? So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Very interesting comments here, and I would love to be able to read all of them. But really what comes through are two key areas, and it's not just because this was a digital transformation angle survey, but really it is. Digital transformation is very important to improve procurement performance and collaboration, and that very much speaks to what we believe within this industry, is that if we need to collaborate together to move forward. So in order to build resilience, digital transformation. So let's have a look at that, because it's easier said than done, and I think many of you in our audience will share that perspective. So having a look here, I'm going to lean back on Stacey again, and it's interesting because she kind of, again, wears two hats: head of procurement in a digital environment. But we did laugh that there's a saying, says the cobbler's children is the ones that never have shoes. So possibly she's one that really understands this. So, you know, according to you, Stacey, can digital procurement help improve procurement departments? And have you started this transformation in your own organization? And I'm going to round it off by a third question, so just bombard you. Is it important to you, and if so, why?
So yeah, I think let's start with the easy answer. We've started and stopped our digital journey. So we've kind of done ad hoc bits over the last couple of years. You know, three-way matching, so we have a tool for that. We have a tool for vendor vetting and onboarding. So they're little bits, but we're still lacking that single vision and single platform. And of course, I think when we go into the slides again, I don't want to reveal all from the results, but there's a couple of barriers in place as to why it's kind of like a hurry up, wait, when in fact in all things digital. But yes, we have started our journey, and we have recently, in fact, in the last 2 weeks, kicked off our full-blown, you know, basically actually quote to cash, not just P2P platform implementation. You know, and I think it is important. It does create a lot of efficiencies, and with efficiencies, one would hope that, you know, some cost efficiencies come through there as well. I think for me personally, what's more important is creating the visibility, the transparency, you know, the ability to do proper spend analysis, to analyze trends, to pipeline. You know, that's where the real value of digitization comes in. It's you know, it's more than just the cost optimization. But again, I guess that's why, you know, why we have these barriers to implementing is, you know, being able to clearly articulate those benefits to a CFO that, because of COVID, is under immense, you know, financial constraints. And so that's where we could all collaborate and work together and work with, you know, the likes of CIPS and yourselves, Deb, is to and of course with companies like Oxalys, is how do we actually articulate that value for the business so that we can move forward with those digital transformation journeys.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Stacey. I'd like also, not now, maybe in about 2 or 3 slides, just to put to the panelists, and maybe if Anne can answer that just given that there is a lot more remote working, how does a digital transformation process actually assist efficiencies in your procurement department? So maybe if I can let you all think a little bit on that. And it is quite eye-opening, and for the reasons that you've probably stated, Stacey, that only 43%, or not only 43% of South African organizations haven't even started. They haven't looked at it yet, and the question is, how do we reduce those barriers if we were going to become more efficient? If we look here at figure 14, according to their own companies, now again, keep in mind it's according to your company, not to you as the head of procurement or procurement professional, how important is the digitalization of the procurement process? Well, look at that, 44% not important at all. I mean, that's quite scary. That's just not important. It's so low on the food chain, it's scary. And yeah, how do we change that? Because we know that if we're going to be more strategic and deliver more insights in spend and demand management, and as you said, Stacey, sales, because that's really what procurement also does. It facilitates the marketing and sales process. Well, how do we do it if we can't get efficiencies and insights? I'm probably taking a little bit of Anne's insight there, but I was very, very much surprised by this. If we look at this slide as well, have you noticed any improvements in your procurement process since implementation? For one, to implement it, well, 80%. I'm not sure what the 20% was. Maybe they were having a bad day, but 80% is pretty substantial. And what are the results that they're seeing? So if we look at figure 17 versus 17B, it mentions 3 areas. I'd like to call on Anne now, maybe just to, because at the coalface of implementing these kind of digital transformation projects, you obviously see these in clients. Tell us a bit more about it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Debbie. So yeah, you're right. 89% of respondents say that their first improvements following the implementation of a procurement system is better visibility and transparency in procurement. And it's not a surprise, basically. This is the first quick win that organization experience most of the time, because of course, because all your spend information is centralized on one single platform, you have improved visibility on your business and across every department. You have visibility on transactions from marketing department, from the sales department, from operations, etc. And this at the click of a button and on a real-time basis. So that's really how you can improve your visibility and transparency in procurement. If we look at the second benefit highlighted by our respondent, we can see that they say, okay, we achieve reduced cycle time. And again, digital procurement is also about automation. Because most of procurement tasks are being automated, the whole process is made quicker and more efficient. You can, for example, automatically send orders to suppliers when they have been approved internally, and of course, if they are compliant with the budget. You can also automatically send and approve payments as soon as the invoice has been approved by the AP department. You can also set up automatic reminder when your contract is expired, etc., etc. So all these tasks that was done before with like one single person can be automated, and you don't have to wait for this person anymore to click on the button and move forward in the process. And for the task that's going to be automated, of course, you can see the approval workflow and see who is the one that should be approved, that should approve this this document or this particular request, and it makes this whole process really seamless and again quicker and more efficient.
Thank you, Anne, for expounding on these insights in figure 7B. Something that I also was thinking around is earlier we saw that one of the key areas of focus for procurement is on improving the supplier relationship and supplier development. Now, how often we see, because of the work we do on the enterprise supplier development side and the expo side, that most organizations don't know exactly that 89% visibility. So you can see that if that is what their strategic objective is, how can they achieve it if they literally have no visibility on their spend? And where are they tier 1 and tier 2? So quite interesting that if you don't have that, you can't really deliver on that particular strategy. Also then I would probably expand to CIPS month, which may have been in the Q&A. You know, how is CIPS from a capacity building side enabling these senior executives to understand the data and this transparency and how to apply innovation and to apply best practice? Because that's really what a system like this is providing, but you still need the skill and you still need the strategic thought process to apply changes to achieve the results in an organization. If we have a look here on our next slide 22, what type of procurement automation tools do you use? So we obviously see that all of this also does highly depend on the type of automation tool used within an organization. So 66% have a tool that is part of the ERP system, 38% is an Excel spreadsheet, so that's not really an automated tool. That's very, very, very high-level spreadsheets, and then 19% actually are the only ones that use a cloud-based procurement solution. And as Stacey will probably touch something on here, because what we do understand is that any tool that is just a plug and play within an ERP system is not necessarily a digital procurement tool, so it's something to think about as well. So if we look here on figure 19, which of the following criteria will be most important in influencing your organization's decision in adopting a digital procurement solution? So if we look here, it's covering the entire procurement process. It's pricing, it's end-to-end procurement process, 41% needs to be covered by this digital procurement solution. And then obviously 35% integrating with other systems, which can get quite clunky, I imagine, at certain points. If we look here, carrying on just our key perspectives, when do you estimate, and this was interesting, your organization will adopt a digital procurement solution? So even though it was not seen as important, our organizations look at this. So between 1 and 3 years, 63%, and less than 1 year, 14%. And I don't think anyone can doubt that with the industrial revolution, that this cannot be on the agenda of organizations. Otherwise, they will be left behind, and more the developing than the developed economy. And but, what are our main obstacles? So having a look here, and it's interesting, before I even got to this slide and this result, I already thought in my head, just conversations over the years, and I'm sure my panelists will absolutely agree, it's change management, it's people's habits. But we've always used this Excel spreadsheet. I know how to use it, you know. But if we think about a year ago, who thought we would be running a webinar like this? We'd be sitting in a conference room somewhere. And yet, look what's been achieved by being a little uncomfortable, but the efficiencies that have been achieved and the amount of knowledge sharing and the amount of access for this particular profession that is being achieved through doing things online. So look at this, 75% is people's habits. So Stacey, please can you give us a comment on this, because I think you've had first-hand experience.
I have, Debbie, not in the current role, but over the years. I think one of the biggest mistakes that any organization on a digitization journey makes is to start with the platform. You know, you have to start with process. You know, you have to understand what is best practice, you know, what are those habits, how tested in the way we work, and how should they be, and make sure you've got a good grip on that. And then obviously, you know, looking at the people part of it, you know, and that talks to CIPS there, you know, if this is the end goal, if this is our new way of work, what skills do we need in order to achieve that? What capabilities do we need to build? Make sure we've got the right people with the right skills in place, and then only look to the platform. And I think the reason people battle to change their habits is because they haven't been brought along that journey. So by the time, you know, the platform's in, and then people are only starting to talk about, well, how does that impact what you do? How does that, you know, impact, and not just our own people, you know, in the procurement space, our suppliers are usually left out of these implementations completely. And it's a very emotional thing for them, because their habits have to change. The way they submit their invoices, the way they receive orders, the way they quote, having to provide catalogs, all of those things that they're not used to, they now have to do. And unless we bring everybody along that journey and everybody understands the process and their role from a people point of view, you know, your platform implementation will fail. And people won't change their habits because there's no ownership there, and they don't see why.
Yeah, it's the what's in it for them, and explaining that. You know, we've actually, I've seen a lot of procurement departments emailing quite recently, just, okay, we're on this new system now, make sure you align, as opposed to why, you know, and the reason why the organization has gone through that whole change of the new system and how it benefits suppliers. So I think that's a very pertinent point that you've shared. Thank you, Stacey. And Hemant, I mean, how do we prepare? Stacey touched on it around the skills for what's coming and digital transformation in procurement. What does CIPS see? I think you're on mute, Hemant.
Oh, my apologies. What the survey does, it really underscores the need for greater understanding of the benefits of such solutions. And what it also emphasizes is that people are intimidated, you know, around these solutions and the talk amongst it. I think to an extent, South African organizations have also gotten carried away with the hype from multinationals or parent companies and wanting to force this adoption. And I think currently in South Africa, we're fortunate that procurement is not at the end of the maturity scale, yet it's in a state of flux, as I mentioned earlier. So we can easily adopt and forge ahead. You know, I think it's really critical to sharpen the tools and ensure the paradigm shift in our thinking and bring about the agility. And you've mentioned it, Debbie. If not, you know, we're going to be left behind on the global platform. So this is really change management 101. You know, what's the burning imperative? What's the need for change? Also, when we think of technology as South Africans, we often associate it with job losses. And I don't see that. I see rather we'll be remodeling positions to suit the technology. And it's a given that properly deployed technology is increasingly the differentiator between leading organizations. And we've seen that globally. And there's some great case study coming out of leading companies. So liberated from admin, you know, senior CPOs and senior procurement personnel can think more creatively and strategically about the value that they deliver. And I think to benefit from artificial intelligence, managers, procurement functions need to sharpen the emotional intelligence. You know, we need to actually embrace this and charter a way for our teams and give them the reassurance. So it all starts with the mindset. But having said that, what the survey also says, you know, bringing about technology is going to amplify inefficiencies and processes that don't work. So this comes down to skills again. And let's use skills to actually get the base right. And once we get that right, we can overlay technology and pivot our procurement functions. And that's how we see this. I'm an absolute advocate for procurement solutions and technology solutions. We can't be pushed back from it. And I do believe it's here to stay. You know, the change is inevitable. And we got to use these digital advancements to benefit, you know, from what we're already doing, basically.
Absolutely. And really, with implementing these systems, it frees up the procurement decision makers to be involved in more the strategic decisions. So if we want to be operating at that level, we can't be so busy in the day-to-day and sort of the immature side of the procurement process.
Yeah, yeah, and the spreadsheets. Yeah,
spreadsheets. And in fact, I mean, something we still see continuously is contract management. Just at such a basic level that there's no management of that process, and yet there are tools that just really can simplify that process and allow the procurement manager to get involved in strategic sourcing, not just, you know, renewing and the 3-quote system, as we say.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I just want to add as well, Debbie, I neglected to mention, and I don't think organizations need to set out to boil the ocean. I think let's understand your needs, you know, and these are very modularized solutions. So you can take a particular solution, for instance, contract management, and build on that and see if it works for you and if you're deriving benefit.
Yeah, exactly. Although I have a particular thought process around the 4th industrial revolution. And I think one of the opportunities, yes, we may be as an African continent behind, but we can leapfrog now. Yeah. So whereas our developed countries have gone through the scars and the pain of figuring out what works best, we can, almost as you said, in a modularized way, choose what's going to work best for us, and we don't have to get all the bruises to get there. So that's one of the opportunities as well as the continent. We are going to just have some closing thoughts from our panelists and then open up for Q&A. And if I can reach out to Stacey, just, you know, your closing aha thoughts out of this discussion. You've given us some pearls of wisdom, but what would be your closing thoughts to the audience before we open for questions?
I think my closing thought would be to the procurement leaders on the call, the more senior practitioners. I think what was glaringly obvious for me was that, it's a bit of an indictment to us as leaders. If we are not clearly articulating our purpose, the business can't understand the strategy. If your people don't understand if your own teams, procurement teams, don't understand our purpose, we're never going to be seen as more than cost savers to the business. So I think, it came out in a number of areas within that is we've got some work to do around, ourselves understanding the procurement role in the business, how it supports the strategy, articulating that to our teams, skilling our teams, and then looking to digitization to enhance that even further.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Stacey. And Anne, from your perspective?
Apologies, I was on mute. Yeah, I think I will quote Hemant on that. He said, and perfectly said that. He said, change is inevitable. And from what we found in the surveying, change management can be really, really, the greatest barrier to digital transformation. And I think that we need to change the way procurement is perceived in the organization. As Stacey said, if we can't articulate the value that procurement teams can bring to the organization, we won't be able to improve our maturity and to get the sponsorship that we need to implement procurement system, for example. We need also to change our procurement processes to improve our performance. We've seen that in the survey. And lastly, I will say that we need to change our approach to technology. As Hemant said again, technology is not here to replace jobs. Technology is here to help the procurement get there in terms of maturity level. And if we don't train and communicate enough on its benefits to procurement teams and more generally to the whole organization, we won't be able to get there. So yeah, I think that change was my closing words today. But just before, I would like also to thank all the professionals that have contributed to this survey. They have helped us compile a more than 50 pages report. So we are really happy with this first edition, and we look forward to the second one, of course.
Thank you very much, Anne. And again, that was the most eye-opening for me. If a procurement professional doesn't feel that the organization understands their role and their strategy in the context, the fact that they think they're going along with the organization, it makes no difference. If the CEO is not seeing it and they're not confident in it. So that's one of the quick wins, to focus on communicating and making sure that everyone who knows anything in the organization knows where procurement fits in that strategy. Hemant, from your perspective?
Yeah, first and foremost, I'd just like to thank Oxalys for the survey. I think, given the context and the time that the survey was conducted, brave decision, but the insights are just beautiful. And even, like you said, Anne, we haven't done a survey to test the industry. It was always, for us, it was about members and membership value, etc. And I'm really heartened and encouraged by the findings, and we know procurement to be tactical, but I think people are expressing thoughts about, pivoting their operations and moving more towards technology and breaking that mold of just cost savings, which is great. And I think to all the procurement professionals on the call, from my perspective, procurement has always fought for a seat around the boardroom table and for relevance. This is the time, the function has just moved from the support function, to the boardroom table in a matter of months. It's there to be a strategic turnaround function for your organizations now. So you use this opportunity to move ahead. And I can imagine a lot of procurement personnel, it's all about getting the right solutions, wondering, is this the right for me? Is technology the right thing for our organization? Do we really need it? My answer is yes, but just scope it out and make sure that your base is right before adopting anything. And then you'll actually get the benefits of it. It'll be a no-brainer.
Absolutely. Well, just look at the vaccines and tell me procurement supply chain is not important.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Amant, and Stacey and Anne. You're not off the hook yet, though. We have a few questions that have come from our audience that I'd like to pose. And the first of is, and I think this is directed towards Amant. Amant, what is your vision for public procurement, and is there any specificity to highlight if you look at the survey, just things that we can bring to the table?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. So, procurement as a whole appears to be behind the curve, but I still maintain it's a state of flux. And in public sector, given the history and the aspiration of an inclusive economy, our procurement set out to realize benefits of structural and policy reforms. And this was to ensure economic emancipation, following our political freedom. I do believe there has been an over-reliance on policies, and to an extent, it's become the beacon as well as the lighthouse, and it has allowed malpractice, levels of corruption and kleptocracy. And however, I do think the policy needs to remain, as guide rails, yet there needs to be skills adoption in order to apply ourselves better in procurement. I mean, Debbie, a few seconds ago, you mentioned the example of vaccines. We're dealing with healthcare, and some of the procurement is quite elementary. However, there is vision in order to improve that. And one of the quick enablers is the adoption of technology. Yet I think what we need to do is fix the base. We need to get the structural base, right, the ethics, because it's exceptionally distracting. It doesn't allow us to move ahead. And once we get that base sorted out and bring technology, it just improves the transparency, the efficiency of decision making. I think it levels the playing fields across all spheres of government. So it creates that synthesis. And I definitely think in 2 to 3 years, if we have the will, we definitely have the political will. But if we have the the will to execute, I can definitely see that as being a game changer.
Exactly, and I think again, going to the technology side, if you could implement technology, it also takes a lot of the steps out of the process that can be fraught with corruption.
That's it, and streamline decision making. Just a click of a button, and here we are. We've got vaccines.
Done.
So
I've seen often from our partners and chatting to ones within public sector that there is this absolute resistance because of that. And typically the decision to implement does get stopped. So I suppose it would have to come from a national treasury side, I think, to implement it, top down, and then we can see some change.
Yeah, well, that and the change management, because you just need buy-in as well at all levels. So, yeah.
Correct. Question to you, Anne. Since most organizations are already using ERP or accounting tools, what would be the added value of a procurement software?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a surprise that a lot of people are already using their ERP or accounting tools, because at the end, those systems are already existing and people tend to use what is already existent in the organization. So it's not a surprise. But I would say that ERPs are, of course, a first step toward digital transformation in procurement, but we can't say that those are digital procurement tools, because most of the time, they only cover the transactional parts of the process, meaning the purchase to pay. So everything from ordering to invoicing and payment management. But what really makes procurement critical to a company, to an organization, what really bring value, which is sourcing activities, contract management, risk management, supplier relationship management are not covered by the system. And those parts are completely left out. And it's really unfortunate because at the end, you can't really fully benefit from digital procurement if you don't cover the end-to-end procurement process. So for that, I mean, for this thing, for covering the whole procurement process, the better tools are specialized procurement cloud-based solution.
So exactly what you've just highlighted is in a procurement software, not just an ERP system, is what we are saying is the strategic focus that's in the survey. What did it say? Those exact areas: supply management, risk management. Those are the focus areas. Yet how are we going to achieve it if we're just using a plug and play, or not even plug and play, what's been in the system, a bit of a clunky, limited use in your process. So I think that talks very nicely to what the industry is saying and joins the dots. We do have some questions from our attendees, so thank you for posting. And a question that's been posed is, how has COVID affected procurement's expectations of tenders, bids, or proposals, the quality, content, and focus areas? I think it's a very good question. Probably will post that to Stacey to start, given that you would be going through tender processes.
So yeah, Debbie, funny enough, the last year's been pretty quiet on the bid front. In terms of what we've been doing, in the market, I guess it's kind of been a keep your head above the water. What better the devil you know. It's safer for now, than switching to a new supplier, and then finding yourself stranded because of various supply chain defaults due to COVID. So we haven't really. I think we've probably only run about 2 RFPs over the last year, and I don't, for me, I guess probably because they were sort of specialized, we didn't see any impact from COVID in terms of quality. So maybe that's just my experience, but I haven't really seen an impact in that space from a bid or RFP process. I guess where it might become difficult is particularly for our smaller vendors, who are trying to participate in meaningful bids in a time where they're small already and they're so impacted by employees, being affected by COVID, you're buying teams sort of averse, being very averse to risk, but not wanting to go for anything new because you just want to keep that head above water. So personally not experienced it, but I should imagine that there has been some impact.
Especially if you are pushing risk management and cost, which can, you almost have to take a bit of risk when onboarding a new supplier and if you're supporting a smaller supplier. Hemant, from your side, what are you seeing within industry around tenders and bids?
Yeah, I think it varies. I think some are, managing to maintain the quality and the robustness of their processes. Others are just clamoring for supply, to keep the operations alive, or maybe to get PPE in so staff can work. And to that extent, you see a lot of deviation orders or short-circuiting processes, and just getting in product at any cost as well. So the procurement, there's a few balls to juggle, and procurement personnel are dealing with this, cost versus risk versus security of supply, and which one do you take? So it has become a bit disorientated, but as the COVID situation improves, coming out of lockdown last year in September, we saw levels of process being restored, and more compliance and due diligence around the risk mitigation. So yeah, that's likely to persist for most of this year. Excuse me. Yeah.
Thank you, Hemant. I must say what we saw at some point in conversations last year was this online posting of bids and tender process and finding a way around that. I saw an interesting request just recently from a bank in Namibia, I won't say who, and they were looking for an online system that they could release the tender, and then on a certain day, another department, almost like a two-key process. So what is interesting is that I think COVID has reduced maybe some of the costs and the clunkiness around the tender process. But again, Stacey, you kind of raised the other side of it, where the smaller businesses are wanting to go for these opportunities, have their own challenges that have been impacted due to COVID. And from a technology point of view, what are you seeing? Are you seeing more needs around the tender process? Just curious, does Oxalys have a certain solution to support that?
Yeah. So I think sourcing activities are one of the most time-consuming in procurement, because you have to keep communicating with your vendors. You have to score all the responses from your vendors. You have also to make sure that the whole tendering process is transparent and compliant, and this is quite tedious. So of course, technology can help with that. So you have one single platform when you can issue your tender. You can also receive digital responses from your vendor, and you can also set up some criteria to automatically assess some responses. So I won't say that the whole process can be fully automated, because at the end, this is sourcing. It is really important, as a procurement task. But technology can definitely help in reducing the time allocated to this activity, and to free up some buyer time from other activities as strategic as sourcing, such as spend analysis, such as procurement action plan, risk management, as we said. So yeah, technology can definitely help in that regard.
It's interesting, last year, a very large international petrochem company, I'm not allowed to use names, but their head of procurement sat on a committee, almost like a disaster committee. And I think the petrochemical industry tends to be a little bit more astute to those situations. And it was interesting because it was that insight and that spend visibility that they were able to look every single day. They were reporting on where they expected things to go. And again, that goes back to what we said on systems and visibility. And they were able to very quickly navigate and be very agile around what was happening around COVID. I think at some point, I remember chatting to someone who said they're not planning months in ahead, they're working in 8-week cycles. And you can imagine, if you are still spending hours with spreadsheets trying to even understand your spend, how can you be not reactive, proactive to support the business? So very interesting. And I'm sure if anyone would like to know more on the various modules and what Oxalys offers, they can pop a note. I just want to see, I think we've got one more question. In fact, two. Stacey, this probably goes a little back to what you were talking on suppliers. Someone asked, DiData appears to promote the larger procurement technology brands, but what steps are being taken to consider advocating smaller brands and getting a foot in the door?
Yeah, Debbie, it's difficult. As a system integrator and a reseller, it's very much client demand driven in terms of what technologies we select, and particularly if we look at vast, well, not vast majority, but certainly a large portion of our client base that's in the financial services, and you can imagine the risk involved in them sort of wanting to experiment with smaller technologies versus going with the likes of a Cisco, who's trusted and proven and been around forever, and you have, an army of engineers who can support it, etc. So, it's a tricky one. So we tend to focus our supply development efforts more in our services space. And so how do we take, smaller companies, upskill them, certify them, work with our vendors, our bigger vendors to certify them. Very difficult in many cases to switch to smaller technologies for those reasons, that it really is a client demand driven industry that we operate in. And to try and convince the likes of the 5 major banks that there's a small local software that's going to do for them what Microsoft or Oracle or Cisco does is an incredibly difficult conversation.
I think that goes down to also their commitment to sourcing locally, and that it's a partnership. So it's a shared risk. It shouldn't just be one. So I could talk for hours on that. There's one more question. I understand we have overrun by a few minutes. So I'm going to end with one question from the audience, which is just asking, maybe it's semantics, but just, are we talking about incremental changes in procurement or transformation, and how does the panel see the difference? I don't know. Interesting one. I don't know who would like to.
I'd like to take a crack on that one.
Go for it.
So I think for me, that good old saying in the consulting world, how do you eat an elephant? It's in small bites, right? So digital transformation is having that journey mapped out, knowing exactly what the endpoint needs to be and how everything along the way from a process people fits into that. That's the transformation journey. But like any journey, we don't have those little beam me up Scotty buttons that get us to the end point immediately. So it's a journey, and hence incremental buy this chunk, and when it works and it's stable, buy the next chunk. But that for me would be the difference between incremental improvements have to be supporting that overall transformation journey.
Absolutely. Hemant's nodding there, so I think you agree. And yeah, I think if you try to do too quick a dramatic change, you land up setting up for failure and then losing the support for digital transformation. Hemant, did you want to add anything?
No, Stacey, you put it perfectly. Couldn't agree more.
Well, I have to say a huge thank you. Thank you to Oxalys for initiating the survey at a very interesting time. It's been a pleasure as Smart Procurement to support you, and thank you to our community and our procurement community and heads of procurement and supply chain for taking time to complete this. And hopefully you were able to attend and derive benefit from some key insights. And some of them might have seemed very obvious, and yet sometimes it's the simple things that we need to attack first in order to achieve that transformation. I wish my colleagues all the best for 2021, and to our audience that were here as well. Last year they said it was surviving. This year I'm seeing a lot of thriving. So we wish you all the best. I think given this time last year we didn't know it was coming, now we've been through it. We know what to expect, and now we can get back to some of our innovation and some of our creation. So all the best for what you may be implementing, and please keep relying on resources and events like this. Thank you again, Oxalys, for sharing. Stacey, all the best, and Hemant as well, and I'm sure we will see you online very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.